Hello and welcome back to the Motorsport Baithak podcast. I'm your host DD, and joining me once again today is my friend and your co-host Vedant. On this episode, we'll be talking about the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. So, let's grab some chai, take our seats, ready your opinions, and dive right into the conversation. Hello Vedant, how have you been? Uh, I am still recovering from the side effects of my second COVID vaccine shot, so I'll apologize if I seem a little low today.
Yeah, hello Divya. I have been well and I have been buzzing from the race we had on Sunday. Absolute stunner, and Baku continues to impress us, and let's just say well done Baku.
Absolutely. I mean, the way this season is shaping up, it seems it'll go down in the history books, and you just can't predict what is going to happen. All normality is out of the window, and every day between two races just like feels forever. And it just, I'm buzzing, but I'm tired, and it's like a weird feeling. I want to be shouting on the top of my voice, but that's not going to happen. But let's get into it. What are your thoughts about the weekend? Firstly, I just want to put it out there you couldn't have asked for a podium with nicer guys on it. Sergio Perez, Sebastian Vettel, and Pierre Gasly. All three guys dropped from their teams last year and on the podium together at Baku. Couldn't have been a better story, really.
Yeah, the podium of redemption.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I was expecting way more carnage, during the race based on the qualifying we had, but the race was still interesting. But I was just, my expectations were like way higher after having like four red flags in qualifying. So
Yeah, you're right. I mean,
uh,
uh, the number of times people found the walls in qualifying and in Formula 2. I mean, I believe that the walls of Baku were super hungry, but apparently they covered all their appetite before the race in the different sessions.
absolutely. I mean, you could have put it better, any better. But talking about people crashing into walls, let's talk about the incident with Stroll and Max there. And obviously, Pirelli has come out and said that it was the debris, but that's not what I'm trying to talk about here. I'm trying to talk about FIA's response to the two incidents and why the two different responses. Because when Stroll crashed, we had a safety car, and then all the cars went around the track. There was no red flag, but when the Verstappen incident happened, even though in my opinion it was much safer since the cars were going through the pit lane and not directly crossing, not directly at the side of the crash. It was much safer, but still, the race was red flagged. And Michael Masi came out and said it was in the interest of the race and whatnot. But why the two different responses, and why not just red flag the race when the Stroll incident happened? Especially keeping in mind that the cars are still going pretty fast, and if one tire has failed, the other tires could also fail potentially during that time, and you have track workers on the track, you have marshals, you have the cars, and there's like just so much to lose, especially after Roman's incident last year. I think this is something we really need to look forward to, and not just that, the fact that the FIA, especially Michael Masi and his team, took so long to respond to both incidents. I think Charles was really angry because it took like a minute and a half before the yellow flags came out after Max's incident, and just as long during Stroll's incident. I mean, there's a button that just press it. So much money in the sport. Why can't those responses be quicker yet?
Yeah, I think you bring up a very excellent point. Like his reasoning for the different responses, I understand that, but at the same time, I would, I mean, we heard the Red Bull guys tell Michael Masi on the on the radio that please red flag the session because everyone has older tires now, and these tires will give up because Red Bull didn't have any indication that the tires will give up. They didn't have any warning, and that tire did give up. Max Verstappen's tire, and Red Bull said, "Please red flag the session so that everyone can change the tires." And after that, Michael Masi red flagged it. Now, of course, Michael Masi did not red flag it because Red Bull said it, but it took Red Bull. I mean,
The initiative had to be taken by Red Bull in order for
yeah,
Michael Masi to realize what was really going on. And I think
absolutely.
that applies to, the Strolls incident too, because even at that point, people had switched onto the hard tires and there was debris on track, right? And you didn't know what the real cause was. So I think, and just the fact that the car was on the track in a high speed section, and there was debris all over, because they did close the pit lane, right, so that people couldn't come in and have to, so that there wasn't a rush of people in the pit lane trying to change their tires and get on fresher
No,
tires.
the
They could have just,
the pit lane was changed because Stroll's car was at the entry of the pit lane.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, that's true too. But then again, they could have just red flagged the race, gotten everyone in slowly, and then just uh, it could have just been like that.
Yeah, I mean,
But
once again, these small fallacies and small mistakes as such that Michael Masia and his teams are making, which are not major incidents in themselves, but if you look at the wider picture of the sport, and all these accumulate to be a very big, strange stuff that is going on in Formula One.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Michael Massey has been in the sport for long enough now to get things under control, and maybe FIA needs like a bigger team of personnel at every race, and the smaller team is not working out for them. But it's really up to them to fix their issues. Now let's talk about Pirelli. Obviously Pirelli came out and said after the race that most likely it's the debris that caused tire failures because they found a cut on Hamilton's tire and so on and so forth. But I mean, I don't think, regardless of whatever the investigation says, I think the only impact it's going to have is on maybe next year's tire for the 2022 18-inch tires. It's not going to have an effect on what Pirelli are going to do this year. At max, like we saw last year after Silverstone, they'll just either bring the harder compounds to every race, or they'll increase the tire pressures, the minimum tire pressures at every race. So I don't think there's a lot to come out of this. But definitely heartbreak for Lance Stroll, and especially for Max Verstappen because of the tire failures at the end of the race.
Absolutely. I mean, we have seen, and it's not just us casual fans that are saying this. We have seen and heard from motorsport pundits and respected people in the community, journalists and everyone, that this was at the core Pirelli issue, not their mistake as such, but a Pirelli issue and not a team issue or not a track issue. So I don't know. Let's see what the results come out.
Yeah, both Pirelli and FIA having a bad day at the track. Michael Massey and Marius will have a lot to answer for.
Yeah, and the strange thing was, both the tires were the same tires.
Yep.
The left rear, and the left rear is the least affected tire at this circuit. So it was very, very strange circumstances.
Yeah, which is why which is why the fact that like Max Verstappen, Lance Stroll losing the tire was caused by debris becomes much more digestible as a reasoning rather than tire wear, because you would imagine the right rear tire to go away first, because that is what limits the performance of the car. But regardless, Pirelli have to look for answers, and we as fans want some answers. But you have to give it to Michael Massey for to restarting the race even with just 2 laps left. According to the rules, he could have just called off the race or finished under the safety car, but he didn't do that. He gave us a brilliant last 2 laps for the fans.
Yeah, he could have called out the race because we have the 75% rule, and the countback rule. So kudos to Michael Massey to give us a very, very exciting final 2 laps.
Absolutely, so you'll have to give it to him. But now let's get into the nitty-gritty of how the weekend turned out for all the teams and how it's going to affect our championship moving forward. So let's talk about the championship defending team, Mercedes. 148 points in the Constructors' Championship, did not come away with a single point after this weekend. This is the first time since 2012 that both Mercedes cars finished the race outside the points, which is not the same as DNF. The last double DNF was in Austria 2018, which also resulted in a 55 race run of point streak coming to an end this past weekend. So a really bad weekend for Mercedes, and also losing ground in the Constructors' Championship.
Yeah, we talked about Mercedes bouncing back after Monaco, and
Not even close.
Not even close. 0 points.
Absolutely. But let's talk about the two drivers. Although the weekend resulted in similar, although they had similar results at the end of the weekend, the way the weekend shaped out was really different. Lewis had a great quali. He had a great race. A bad pit stop put him behind Perez, but he still, was hanging with Perez and Verstappen as much as he could throughout the race. But at that restart, just knocks on that magic button and just goes into the runoff in turn one. And I was on my feet and I was shouting on my lungs when I saw that happen, even though I was feeling sick
Absolutely.
as sick as hell. And I was like, what just happened? There was Lewis Hamilton nearly taking the lead from Sergio Perez, and then comes off worse and finishes P15. For our listeners who don't know what the magic button is, basically a button that shifts the brake bias forward. It's like a 90-10, or like it's basically shifting the brake bias towards the front of the car. And Lewis ended up switching on the magic button basically, and putting the brake bias forward when he started the race while he was upshifting, which he shouldn't have, which led him to lock up his front brakes and basically skid into turn one and into the runoff area, which spoiled his race. But famous last words from Lewis before finishing or restarting the race. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and there is Lewis losing both the marathon and the sprint after that weekend. But definitely, it seems like he's feeling the pressure. Squandered his chance to take the lead back in the championship, and the headline for Lewis has been, especially in the casual fan community, that he finished below Mazepin, which is a new low. And his 54 race point streak comes to an end after this disappointing weekend. So yeah, what do you think? What's going on with Lewis, and what does he need to do to come back from it?
I think firstly the pressure is definitely building up for Lewis Hamilton, and I mean luckily for him, Max Verstappen didn't score any points, so they are still on equal grounds. But if Max Verstappen gets a couple more better results than Lewis Hamilton and takes a lead of say 10-15 points in the coming 4-5 races, that would really shape the championship out of contention for Lewis, in my opinion, because we saw that in 2016. Once Nico Rosberg had the upper hand, Lewis Hamilton was struggling to come back stronger. But yeah, the incident just shows us that even the slightest mistake from the greatest and the one of the most experienced and one of the most successful driver can happen in Formula One, and just how intricate and just how technical this sport really is.
I mean, definitely. I mean, this race was definitely damage limitation for both Lewis and Mercedes. And while damage was limited by circumstances, I think they could have done way better. Now let's talk about Valtteri. He couldn't find the pace all weekend, unlike Lewis. He did help Hamilton qualify P2 after giving him a tow during Q3. But again, had a dismal race, finished outside the points in P12, was never in contention for the points, and lost 4 places on the red flag restart. And then after the race, you obviously had that Gasly to Mercedes meme coming, all over the internet. So, what do you think about Valtteri, and what are your views on the championship, and his role in the team for the rest of the season? Because he doesn't have a contract for 2022,
Yeah.
and that is something that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about Valtteri during the course of this season.
Yeah. See, Mercedes did not have the pace coming into Baku, and they did not have the pace in practice. They had issues, they had tire warm up issues, and they had other issues. And Lewis Hamilton make great work of his qualifying runs and qualified P2. But Valtteri Bottas couldn't do it, and we have seen from Valtteri Bottas, whenever he starts lower down the order, it's a disaster for him, and he never scores point or scores very few points. And it was a similar weekend for him. He could not get around those issues that his Mercedes had, and yeah, a disastrous weekend. And the safety car, the red flag restart, losing 4 points is just down to not getting that heat in those tires, which has been the fundamental issue for Mercedes this weekend.
Absolutely, you hit the nail on the head. Mercedes have been struggling with the car in general, with the pace in both in Monaco and in Baku, and they have had tire warm up issues and whatnot. But I think it's just Valtteri's having a run of bad luck. People have come out and said, what the hell is Valtteri doing? People are really fast to stick it to Valtteri after a bad performance. But you have to remember, Valtteri was there when Lewis faltered, in Monaco, and he was there to pick up the points until McLaren screwed up his, not McLaren, Mercedes screwed up his pit stop. So Valtteri has been putting in the performance. He's just had a run of bad luck, and this was just another weekend where he couldn't put it together. And unfortunately, it was a weekend where Lewis also had a run of bad luck, which usually does not happen for Mercedes. Usually they have at least one car
Yeah.
on the podium, but this time coming away with absolutely no points. And really interesting for Mercedes having no pace in the car at all over Monaco and Azerbaijan, because like we talked about in our preview, Mercedes have had pace in general around Baku before, because we've seen Valtteri and Lewis win at Baku twice, I think once each.
Even seats, yeah.
So it's not like Mercedes haven't had pace previously. So it's really, I wouldn't say alarming, but definitely a cause of concern for Mercedes about, where are they losing the pace, and does this have to do something with their development program? Have they already switched hard and fast to 2022, which is, hurting their 2021 development or their 2021 car performance, because they're not really concentrating on it? And is that something that Mercedes need to be worried about? And, maybe they need to reshuffle some resources and put some resources towards the 2021 championship.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, Mercedes are on the back foot right now, and everyone's thinking about 2022. So it would be quite a decision to shuffle those resources around and get because we need to remember this season is affected by the cost cap, and it's the first season affected by the cost cap, and Mercedes has already had a big blow with Valtteri's crash in Imola, and it's a long season still to go, so that would also play a very big role.
Yeah, and it seems like the team is feeling the pressure too. You talk about Mercedes, being absolutely picture perfect and everything, but they have had made two consecutive mistakes in the pit stop this year. First it was Valtteri in Monaco, and this time with Lewis, and which led to Lewis basically, getting overcut even by Perez, who was P3 in the race then. So again, something to look out for. Now let's talk about Red Bull. They're 26 points clear of Mercedes now. So although Red Bull would have wanted to capitalize on the fact that this track suited them and they were effectively the fastest car, and going forward, especially in France, you would imagine that Mercedes might bounce back, since it is a track that has particularly suited them in the past. So Red Bull would have wanted to maximize their chances here, but there was nothing they could have done about the tire failure that Max had towards the end of the race, right? But again, Max had great pace all weekend, great overcut and pit stop. Similarly for Sergio. Sergio could have almost, overcut Max. In fact, if his pit stop had gone to plan,
Yeah.
they would have come out neck and neck. So that would have been really interesting. But again, Red Bull, having a little bit of a moment with Sergio's pit stop. But overall, not the worst weekend for Red Bull. A little bit of a heartbreak, but a lot of positives to come out of it, especially for Sergio.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was the perfect opportunity for them to back those points, and I mean, even if we remove all these factors like Lewis's mistake and Valtteri and Verstappen's crash, Bottas was not scoring any points this weekend, and
Absolutely.
and they could have gotten like those 15
The
points.
difference in the constructors' championship
Yeah.
would have been similar, even if Lewis wouldn't have crashed out and Max wouldn't have crashed out.
Absolutely. So they would have gotten a lot of points and more points than Mercedes this weekend. They still got it, but they were the fastest car, and as you said, Max Verstappen was spot on with everything he was doing this weekend. It was just bad luck for them.
Absolutely. And Sergio had come out earlier in the weekend, and he had said, that he was more confident than ever in the car, and he knew exactly how to drive the car now after having a couple practice sessions in Baku and having a decent week in Monaco. I wasn't so sure of it. I thought it was a little premature coming from Sergio, for someone who's usually quiet about how he's feeling in the car and things like that. But, he showed how much more comfortable he is. And I was a little more skeptical after qualifying about what Sergio said, but in the race you can see how much more comfortable he was in the car, making up places immediately at the start, jumping from P6 to P4, and then holding the ship steady at P2 and allowing Max to, create that gap between him and Lewis essentially to go take the win at the end of the race, even though it didn't pan out that way. And Sergio was also nursing a hydraulic issue that would have led him to retire the car, halfway through the race. So,
Absolutely.
in great stuff from him, and this only heats up, this only because when the season started, I wasn't sure that Sergio would be where he is after Baku, right? I was of the opinion that it would take him at least half a season to get up to pace with Max and be there in that P4 area to help Max win races. But it seems like Sergio is already there, and it only spices up that Mercedes Red Bull constructors championship more than I was expecting it to be.
Yeah, I mean, Perez himself said, "Give me 5 races, and I'll be there." And this was the sixth race, so that's that. But as you said,
Absolutely.
he was nursing a car, and both Mercedes and Red Bull could have come out with 0 points. That would have been the story of the season, in my opinion. But
Absolutely.
lucky to get 25 points out of it.
But yeah, it is definitely seeming like the Red Bull gamble is paying off, and with Sergio, shutting up his critics, and that the second seed curse is definitely being lifted finally from Red Bull. But talking about Mercedes versus Red Bull again, this weekend you could see the setup differences, and the effects of those setup differences on the cars. Mercedes, especially Lewis, was running like a low downforce swing, and while Red Bull were running a high downforce swing, leading to a lower tire deck for Red Bull and a higher tire deck for Lewis, which could be seen, which is why, Red Bull were able to overcut Lewis in the pits with both their cars, not just Max, but with Perez. So you could see that difference in the amount of tire that both the cars were using. So Mercedes was definitely struggling with that. That might reverse itself when we go to France, since it is a low tire deck track at the end of the day. But Lewis versus Max in the Drivers' Championship, still neck and neck, 4 points apart. Sergio versus Valtteri getting really close. Sergio on 69, Valtteri on 66. This will make all the difference at the end of the day when it comes to the Constructors' Championship. And then, I don't know, 69, 60. I might be wrong about that. I think Sergio's got a lot more points than Valtteri. But yeah, anyway, it's a lot to fight for. And like I said before, when this podcast started, the way this season is shaping up, this might just go down in the history books like 2016, like 2012, and we'll be talking about this for a long time to come.
Definitely.
But
Yeah, I
let's get down
agree
to
with
Ferrari.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, but let's move on to Ferrari and McLaren. All right, Ferrari, Leclerc. Oh my God, putting it on pole for a second weekend in a row, and I was just excited about that. When I saw that happening, and my mind was just going nuts. And then it was kind of a repeat of a Monaco where another
Red
car
flag,
crashed
yeah.
out in Q3, bring out the red flags and sealing the pole for the Monegasque. But he finished P4 after a dismal start. But I think that was something we all saw coming because of similar reasons. They didn't have race pace. They were running a low downforce wing, so we knew they would have like huge tire degradation. So the best they could have finished was P4. Definitely, after everything that happened in the race, Vettel was definitely a surprise podium. But we did think that Leclerc would finish behind Gasly at the end of the race, when we were talking about it, during the weekend. But similarly for Carlos, not a great weekend. Made a mistake during the race, locked up his brakes going into one of the turns, and then but still, salvaged his race and finished P8. So I think overall, not a terrible weekend for Carlos, but you would expect much better from him after what he's done over the last few races.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. Like, I agree with everything you said regarding both the drivers. But crucially for me, the talking point about Ferrari this weekend was their setup. And I mean, I did not expect Ferrari to be on pace and be on pole in Baku. But they set up the car very intelligently, and I think Charles Leclerc came out and said after practice or somewhere that they know that they have good pace in the twisty sections, so they don't need to focus on that, and that's why they used a very low downforce wing and got that straight line speed. So yeah, very very
Yeah,
interesting
that is true.
strategy
But
from
like
them.
that is true. But like if you look in the race, Carlos had a really hard time with whatever setup he had to pass even Antonio Giovinazzi during the first few. After he did his first round of pit stop, he came out behind Giovinazzi, and he had a hard time after making that mistake to even overtake Giovinazzi, which was kind of weird because you would think that Ferrari would have the pace on the Alfa Romeo cars even in a straight line, with the setup they were running, but that was not the case. And then again, even during the restart, we don't know what happened to that setup that Ferrari were running over qualifying. Obviously they didn't make a lot of changes because of the Parc Fermé rules, but if they change anything at all, the Ferrari did not seem to have the same pace they had during qualifying during the race, because while Charles did overtake Gasly almost, if you look at the qualifying performance, you wouldn't say that that Gasly would have been able to come back, or you would say that Charles would have been able to make that overtake again on the next lap.
Yeah, it was definitely overtaking. It was definitely a qualifying setup and not a race setup, like qualifying priority setup. So, but interesting strategy nonetheless from them.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe they didn't look at the bigger picture well enough to make sure that they had enough pace for the race, especially from a tire degradation sense. But they tried out something. It worked in qualifying, didn't work on race day. But nevertheless, they are third
Yeah,
in the constructors' championship now, 2 points ahead of McLaren.
they still come out ahead of McLaren, so that's a win-win for them.
That is a win-win for them. Talking about McLaren, sitting at 92 points, 2 points behind Ferrari. They were 2 points ahead of Ferrari going into this weekend. But Lando Norris, qualified P6, which was great. A penalty put him P9. He wasn't very happy with it. He said, the FIA need to look into the rules. But obviously there was some delay in communication with the pit with the garage, and that led to Lando making the mistake and not coming to the pit box because of the red flags. But nonetheless, he still finished P5. Could have been a possible podium had he started P6.
Yeah.
At least that's what it seemed like. But nonetheless, great overtakes on the restart. And in my opinion, Daniel Ricciardo also salvaged a weekend that was going south ever since he came to Baku. After a dismal qualifying, only P13, finishing P9, I believe, is not a bad result, and coming home with some points.
Yeah, definitely. A so-so weekend for them, and I mean it's a generic weekend from and what we have seen from McLaren over the season, because Lando Norris finishing P5 for the 5th time in 6 races, so that's a norm, and Daniel Ricciardo also getting a couple of points. So I think that's the most McLaren could have hoped for. Obviously, anything better would have been great, but still a good weekend from them nonetheless.
Yeah, definitely surprising to see McLaren struggle a little bit for pace out in Baku. Norris did not have the best practice sessions either, and I wouldn't say he was struggling in qualifying, but he was not up there with the Ferraris. And Gasly did out qualify Norris at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So kind of surprising there. But anyway, the Ferrari versus McLaren battle is heating up. But again, we have the battle between AlphaTauri and Aston Martin, again separated by 2 points. AlphaTauri sitting at 39 and Aston Martin at 37. Let's talk about AlphaTauri first. Great weekend for both the drivers. Gasly qualified P4, finished P3. What a weekend for this guy. That battle with Charles at the end of the race, like we mentioned again, great to see them battle it out on the straight. And then Tsunoda put in Q3 finally, had the weekend he needed to have. Red Bull have moved him closer to the factory in Faenza, so I think that is paying some dividends, hopefully. That has something to do with his performance in Baku. But there was some unrest over, Tsunoda getting overtaken by Norris and I think another driver on the restart, and Tsunoda was not happy with it, or the pit box was not happy with it. It was not a great exchange after the race over the radio between Tsunoda and his race engineer. It's kind of weird to hear that, because after all, Tsunoda did finish P7, I believe, and it was a good points haul for AlphaTauri at the end of the day.
I mean, the Yuki Tsunoda team radio is always very lively. So yeah, I was not surprised by whatever he said.
But the Yuki Tsunoda hype train had just ended before this race. After Monaco, everybody was like, all right, Yuki needs to take his time. And then Yuki comes in and puts in a great performance. So hopefully he'll be getting some people back on his hype train after this race. Now, talking about Aston Martin, AlphaTauri had a great weekend. Talking about Aston Martin, though, that strategy masterclass again, the Aston Martin overcut is becoming something of a trend, in my opinion, because if you look back at Monaco, that's what they did there with both Lance and Sebastian, and that is what they did again in Baku. Seb Vettel going long on his soft tires, and Lance had started on those hard tires, in fact, so he would have been going long nonetheless. And coming in clutch, Seb started P11, and after his first round of pit stops, he was P7 and on fresher tires, which allowed him to make up places after the yellow flag restart, and then once again, have giving him a fresh set of tires, fresh set of softs after the red flag restart, allowing him to keep pace with Perez's Red Bull. Although heartbreak for Stroll, essentially he would have come out, I think, P10 had he made his pit stop, made his scheduled pit stop, and then he would have had a fresher set of tires, and he could have made up places and essentially maybe finished P7 or P8 at the end of the day.
Yeah, Stroll would have had a fresher and a softer set of tires compared to everybody else. So that certainly is a heartbreak, because I was really rooting for him to get that strategy spot on, because we have seen, and not only Aston Martin's strategy, but we have seen Lance Stroll go deep into the first stint numerous times and come out with a haul of points. But Sebastian Vettel, I believe he was leading the race at some point. I'm not sure.
Yes.
He was, right?
That was the first time since, yes.
Yeah.
First time since his Ferrari days.
I know people who would have been in, sky high and in heaven just looking at that graphic with, one and...
I mean, I was one of them.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's a fairy tale story, because Sebastian, everybody, questioned Sebastian's move to Aston Martin, and after that, during the first few races of the season, everybody questioned it again, that he does not have the pace, Aston Martin does not have the pace, and they don't have the car. So what's going on? And then Monaco, and then here, Baku. 2 street races, 2 difficult circuits, and Sebastian Vettel showing his class and showing his experience and coming out on top on both of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Seb Vettel, it's a feel good story. There's not a Formula One fan who does not root for Seb Vettel at the end of the day, and who's not happy when Seb Vettel does well, except for when he was in Ferrari and he was going against Lewis. But those days are over now. But it's a feel good story, and you got to remember, Seb Vettel is younger than Lewis essentially. He's got more years in F1 than people think. He might be balding, but he's younger than Lewis, and he's still got his pace. So let's not count him out. And obviously, he's had a dismal last couple of years, but we all love a comeback story. We all love a redemption arc. So let's just hope that this is Seb Vettel's redemption arc. Let's just hope that coming back to racing in with the British team is gonna get Seb Vettel to the front of the grid once again in a couple of years, if not this year.
Yeah, then
and essentially another stat, Seb Vettel is the highest point scorer in Baku throughout
throughout the
history of F1. Throughout the 5 races we've had in Baku.
Sergio Perez has 3 podiums out of 5 races. So that is another impressive result. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now talking about Alpine, still a little ways away from Aston Martin and AlphaTauri in the point standing. But finally, a great weekend from Alonso. As much as I know I'm gonna get scathed after I stop talking, so I'm gonna try and continue to talk. But yeah, Alonso, great qualifying from him. Putting it in Q3, starting P7, I think, and then great overtakes on the restarts, and then finishing. No, Alonso did start P6, and then finishing P6 too. So I think it was a great race from. There was a time in the race where it seemed like Alonso was falling through the positions, and he didn't have the pace, but he did come through eventually to deliver for Alpine. And now this is the first time that that Alonso leads the Drivers' World Championship from Ocon by 1 point. Fernando Alonso has 13 points in the championship, while Esteban has 12.
Yeah.
But just mentioning Esteban's weekend too. Bad weekend, bad quali, and then a power unit failure, but. In Esteban's defense, had he finished the race, he would have come off with some points for sure.
So Fernando qualified P9 but started P8 because of Norris's penalty.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
But that restart, he overtook a Ferrari and a McLaren on that restart.
I think
and Tsunoda.
Daniel,
yep.
Yeah, Carlos and Daniel. Yep,
and Tsunoda. So 3 overtakes on that opening lap at the restart. Absolutely brilliant. I can't be happier now. I mean,
Yeah, I know. That's why I
P6,
said I was gonna get scared by
yeah,
you right now.
P6 is absolutely the maximum they could have hoped for. So yeah, brilliant result
I
for
mean,
them.
yeah, absolutely. Brilliant stuff from Alpine, and you want to see them, fighting with Aston Martin and AlphaTauri at the end of the day. But they did have decent pace, not outright pace, but they did have decent pace to compete with them this weekend, and hopefully they'll be able to take that into France and Austria. So that was like most of the excitement, most of the fighting for the point that was going on this weekend. But let's talk about Alfa Romeo. Again coming off with that 1 point for P10 for Kimi. Not much, but Kimi to Mercedes from one fin to another.
Yeah, that's quite unlikely, but we can dream.
Yeah, we can always dream. And then not much to mention for Williams, just the Latifi penalty because of the miscommunication with his race engineer once again. But things getting spicy at Haas towards the end of the race. Mick Schumacher making that last lap move on Mazepin, and Mazepin doing some dangerous defensive driving. And then Mick was really unhappy on his radio after the race.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows that even though they are at the end of the grid, and even though they are not fighting for points or fighting for anything except bragging rights, they are still competing with each other and they are still giving their best. And even trying to beat Williams, because Schumacher did beat Latifi in, I think it was Imola. But anyway, still great racing from both the rookies and a Haas team which has given up on this season.
Absolutely. Well, that was our rundown of what the 10 teams and the 20 drivers did this weekend. But there's still more from the weekend. No news coming out of FIA upon the flexi wings. So if people who are not following it, FIA did put some dots, and like they were optically measuring the flex in the wings throughout the weekend for all teams. So there's no news regarding that so far. So that is one story that we should all look out for and see what is going to happen, because I think there are changes coming into France. I believe that is when the FIA will bring in the new testing regulations,
Yeah.
and all the teams will have to go through that during the weekend in France, which is 2 weeks from now. Singapore weekend getting cancelled for later this year, so we might have 2 races in the US now. I'm kind of excited for it because I didn't buy tickets to the race that was originally scheduled at Kota, so hopefully there's a second race. I'll get some good tickets for that one. And then Ross Brown making a comment in his column on the F1 website, that the 2-lap restart gives us a good indication of the sprint race. I think that's a tad bit too far. What do you think?
I think the sprint race should be a 5-lap sprint. I mean, Ross Brown said 2 laps. That's like Ross Brown compared the two things. That was, as you said, too much. But instead of the 1/3 distance and a 100-kilometer sprint, I think even if they do a 10-lap sprint, 10-lap sprint would be 50 kilometers at an average, right, across all the circuits. So that would be interesting, because in 10 laps, the cars are much closer. Every penalty will cost them 2 or 3 places, and they can still overtake while they have the chance, as we saw.
Yeah. I don't know how I feel about that, but I'll give it a thought later. But yeah, that's all we have for F1. Some other news coming out of IndyCar though. IndyCar said that they will be looking to the blue flag rules that they have, and maybe take a page from F1's book of rules, and maybe actually introduce blue flags for the back markers, so that the back markers don't fight the race leaders while they're trying to be overtaken. But yeah, that's all. And from my side, but Vedant is bringing us news from the F2 weekend that we had in Baku. So yeah, Vedant, I'll throw to you.
Yeah, thank you. So, as I mentioned earlier, Formula 2 had a lot of incidents with the walls across their 3 races and qualifying and practice. A very, very interesting and incident packed weekend for them. It was the sprint race 2 was the 100th race of the new FIA Formula 2 championship. like the new brand name
After
as such.
the post GP2
Yeah,
era.
the new brand name. So, and Yuri Vips won it, his first win of for Formula 2, and he won again in the feature race on Sunday, which makes Yuri Vips the only person to win two races at the same Formula 2 weekend, which obviously was not possible before this season because of the format. But yeah, he's fourth in the championship now. Guan Yu got a podium and still leads. Oscar Piastri got a podium and got up to second in the championship. Dan Ticktum, very impressive in the races and super confident on the brakes. And I linked him with Danny Rick because both of them are Danny's.
Last of the late breakers.
Yeah, and
Yep.
absolutely brilliant performance from Dan Ticktum on those brakes. He got a podium and he had an incident in the feature race and got penalized for that, I believe. But still, massive haul of points, is fifth in the championship. Robert Schwartzman gets his first win of the season and another podium. So that puts him third in the championship. Massive haul of points. And again, for a brilliant, impressive weekend for Jian Daruwala, a podium and points in both the other races. Now, it could have been better, but he has had some issues during the start of the first race and dropped down from P2. So that's something that we should look out for, because Daruwala has the pace needed. He just needs to get his weekend together. And yeah, that's all
I mean,
from my
absolutely,
side.
especially after a disappointing weekend in Monaco for Jehan, I think this is a good comeback, and hopefully he can build on this to put himself up there in championship contention, hopefully. But yeah, there was a lot of action this weekend. Some crazy stuff in the F2 races, crazy F1 weekend, a crazy weekend in MotoGP if you follow that too. So go watch for the highlights if you didn't. And then there's a lot of racing coming up next weekend. There's 8 hours of Portimao, I believe, next weekend.
Yes, sir.
Along with some Formula E action too. And there's also some rally WRC this past weekend. So go check out the highlights for that if you haven't already. So that's all from my side. Thank you, Vedant, for joining me once again on the Motorsport Baithak podcast. And I'll catch you all